The train wheezed to a stop at Red Hollow Station, its iron lungs expelling one last breath of steam into the autumn air. Claire Devlin pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the small town materialize through the dusty glass. Wooden buildings lined the main street like crooked teeth, their paint peeling in the harsh western sun. This was it, the edge of nowhere, exactly where she needed to be. She gathered her traveling dress, the fabric heavy with dust from the 3-day journey from Kansas. Her trunk contained everything she owned: 2 dresses, a sewing kit, her mother's Bible, and $47 sewn into the lining of her carpet bag. Not much to show for 30 years of living, but then again, she'd left more than belongings behind in Topeka. The porter helped her down the metal steps, his eyes politely avoiding her face. She'd grown accustomed to that look, the careful distance people kept from a woman traveling alone. In cities back east, they whispered behind fans. Out here, they simply stared. "This your stop, ma'am?" The porter's voice carried doubt. "Yes, thank you." He set her trunk on the platform and tipped his cap before retreating to the safety of the train car. Within minutes, the locomotive pulled away, leaving her standing alone on the wooden platform. The October wind cut through her wool coat, carrying the scent of sage and something else, loneliness. Perhaps. Towns like Red Hollow wore it like perfume. Claire straightened her shoulders. She hadn't come this far to falter now. Martha's letter had been brief but clear. Red Hollow needs a seamstress. It's quiet here. Good place to start over. Martha Blackwood, her friend from finishing school, had married a merchant and moved west 10 years ago. They'd exchanged Christmas cards until last year when Martha's husband died of pneumonia. Now Martha ran the general store alone. The main street stretched before her, rutted from wagon wheels and dotted with horse droppings. A few men lounged outside the saloon, their hats pulled low against the afternoon sun. They watched her pass with the lazy interest of dogs tracking a strange cat. Claire kept her eyes forward, her boots clicking against the boardwalk with forced confidence. The Sagebrush Inn sat at the corner of Main and 2nd Street, its sign creaking in the wind. The building had seen better days probably around the time President Lincoln was still walking the earth. Claire pushed open the heavy door, a bell announcing her arrival. The lobby smelled of tobacco and boiled cabbage. A woman emerged from behind a curtained doorway, wiping her hands on a stained apron. Her face bore the deep lines of someone who'd spent too many years squinting into the prairie sun. "Help you?" "I need a room. I'm not sure for how long." The woman's eyes traveled from Claire's city-bought hat to her dust-covered boots, cataloging every detail for later gossip. $2 a week, paid in advance, meals extra, no gentlemen callers after 8 o'clock. Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "That won't be a concern." The woman didn't look convinced. She turned the guest ledger toward Claire. "Name..." Claire hesitated for just a moment before writing her maiden name, Claire Devlin. Let Thomas keep the Sullivan name. She wanted no part of it anymore. "Running from something." The woman's question came sharp as a blade. "Running to something," Claire corrected, meeting her gaze directly. "I'm here to work. I'm a seamstress." "Are you now?" The woman's expression softened marginally. "Well, the Lord knows we could use one. Mrs. Hammond's been doing the mending, but her eyes aren't what they used to be. Room's upstairs, 2nd door on the right. Privy's out back. Pumps in the kitchen, you can wash up there." Claire paid for 2 weeks and climbed the narrow stairs, her trunk bumping against each step. The room was sparse, an iron bed with a thin mattress, a washstand with a cracked pitcher, one ladder-back chair, and hooks on the wall instead of a wardrobe. The window overlooked the alley where a yellow dog rooted through garbage. She sat on the edge of the bed, springs groaning under her weight. 6 months ago, she'd been Mrs. Thomas Sullivan, wife of a respected Kansas City banker. She'd had a house with 4 bedrooms, a cook, and a husband who came home smelling of another woman's perfume the day she'd confronted him. He'd laughed, actually laughed, and said, What did you expect? Claire. A man needs a warm woman, not some ice queen who thinks she's too good to submit to her wifely duties. The words still stung, though not as much as what followed. He'd spread rumors about her unnatural independence, her refusal to be a proper wife. The other women in their social circle had closed ranks, whispering behind their hands at church, crossing the street to avoid her. Even the pastor had suggested she try harder to please her husband, to be more yielding. Claire had yielded all right. She'd yielded her wedding ring to the pawnbroker, her house to Thomas and his mistress, and her reputation to the gossips. But she'd kept her dignity, packed what she could carry, and bought a train ticket west. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. A young girl, perhaps 12, stood in the hallway with a bundle of bedding. "Ma sends these up. Says the ones on the bed probably ain't been washed since summer." "Thank you." Claire took the sheets, noting the patches carefully mended with tiny, even stitches. "Did your mother do this needlework?" "No, ma'am. That'd be old Mrs. Hammond. She's nearly blind, but her fingers still know the way." "Where might I find Mrs. Hammond?" "Blue house past the church, but she don't take visitors much, especially not—" The girl trailed off, suddenly fascinated by her boots. "Especially not strange women from back east." The girl's face flushed. "I didn't mean nothing by it." "I know." Claire smiled, hoping to ease the child's discomfort. "What's your name?" "Lucy. Lucy Brennan. Ma runs the inn." "Well, Lucy, perhaps you could tell people that Miss Devlin is a seamstress looking for work. I can do anything mending, alterations, even new garments if someone has the fabric." Lucy nodded eagerly. "I'll tell Ma. She knows everybody." After the girl left, Claire unpacked her few belongings. She hung her spare dress on a hook, placed her mother's Bible on the nightstand, and arranged her sewing supplies on the windowsill where the light would be best. The familiar sight of her thimbles and thread spools brought unexpected comfort. As afternoon faded to evening, she ventured downstairs to inquire about dinner. The dining room held 3 tables covered in oilcloth, occupied by a handful of boarders who glanced up at her entrance. "Mrs." Brennan gestured to an empty chair. "Stew's 50 cents, breads included." Claire paid and sat, aware of the silence that had fallen over the room. The stew was thin but hot, the bread a day old but filling. She ate methodically, pretending not to notice the stares. "You're the seamstress," a man finally said. He was older, with kind eyes behind wire spectacles. "Yes, Claire Devlin." "Dr. Hawthorne." He extended his hand across the table, ignoring the shocked look from Mrs. Brennan. "Welcome to Red Hollow. Don't mind the quiet, we don't get many newcomers, especially not unaccompanied ladies." "I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself, Doctor." "I don't doubt it. Any woman brave enough to come to Red Hollow alone has steel in her spine." He returned to his meal, but his words had broken the ice. The other boarders began to talk among themselves, though their glances still strayed her way. That night, Claire lay in the narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Red Hollow horses nickering in the livery stable, piano music from the saloon, the distant howl of a coyote. The mattress was lumpy, the room cold, and tomorrow uncertain. But for the first time in months, she felt something besides despair. She'd hidden her wounds well. She thought the bruises on her heart didn't show like the ones Thomas had been careful to leave where clothing would cover, but they were there, deep and aching. Perhaps in this rough town at the edge of civilization, she could heal, or at least learn to live with the scars. The wind rattled the window, and Claire pulled the thin blanket higher. Somewhere in the darkness, a door slammed and a woman laughed harsh and bitter. Claire recognized the sound. It was the laughter of someone who'd learned that fairy tales were for children and that Prince Charming sometimes came home drunk and mean. But she was done with princes, done with fairy tales. Tomorrow she would walk these streets with her head high, find work, and build something new from the ashes of her old life. Red Hollow might be the edge of nowhere, but sometimes nowhere was exactly where you needed to be. The sun was already sinking behind the mountains when Claire realized she'd taken a wrong turn. She'd spent the afternoon visiting potential clients, following Lucy Brennan's hastily drawn map. But somewhere between the blacksmith shop and what should have been Miller's dry goods, the streets had become unfamiliar. Red Hollow wasn't large, but its roads twisted like a drunk man's path, and now shadows stretched long fingers across the dirt streets. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees with the sun, and Claire pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She'd passed the last street lamp 5 minutes ago. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, answered by another. The sound made her quicken her pace. Though she wasn't sure which direction led back to the inn, the buildings here sat farther apart, separated by empty lots full of sagebrush and broken wagon wheels. This was the edge of town, where civilization gave up its pretense and admitted defeat. Her boots caught on something, a rope or wire stretched across the path, and she stumbled forward, barely catching herself. Her carpet bag spilled open, sending spools of thread rolling into the dust. "Steady there." The voice came from her left, low and calm. A man materialized from the shadow of a building, leading a dark horse. He was tall. That much she could tell in the failing light, with broad shoulders that spoke of physical labor, unlike the townsmen she'd met. He wore no vest or jacket, just a worn shirt and leather chaps over his trousers. Claire scrambled to gather her belongings, cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I'm fine, just clumsy." He looped his horse's reins over a post and crouched beside her, picking up a spool of blue thread that had rolled near his boots. His hands were scarred, she noticed, with the kind of marks that came from working with rope and leather. "You lost?" "No." The lie came automatically, born from years of never admitting weakness. Then, because he was still holding her thread and watching her with patient eyes, she amended, "Perhaps a little." "Where you trying to get to?" "The Sagebrush Inn. I thought if I headed back toward Main Street." "You're going the wrong direction. This road leads to the mining camps." He stood, offering her a hand up. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was calloused, but his grip gentle, releasing her hand the moment she was steady. "Thank you." He handed her the thread, then studied her in the dying light. "You're the seamstress, from back east." It wasn't a question, and Claire wondered how he knew. Word traveled fast in small towns, but this man didn't strike her as the gossiping type. "Claire Devlin," she said. "James Colt." He didn't offer his hand again, didn't smile or try to charm her. He simply stood there, solid as the mountains behind him. "It's not safe wandering around after dark. I'll walk you back." "That's not necessary. Ma'am, you're about 10 minutes from finding yourself in the kind of establishment a lady doesn't want to visit." He gestured toward the buildings ahead, where Claire now noticed red lanterns beginning to glow in several windows. "Unless that was your intention." Heat flooded her face. "Certainly not." "Then we go this way." He untied his horse and started walking back the way she'd come. After a moment, Claire followed. They walked in silence for several minutes. James Colt moved like a man comfortable with quiet, leading his horse with one hand while maintaining enough distance that she didn't feel crowded. The horse, a sturdy bay, clip-clopped along peacefully, occasionally snorting at shadows. "You always rescue lost women?" Claire finally asked, trying to lighten the awkwardness. "Not always. Sometimes I rescue lost cattle. Occasionally, a lost dog." His tone was serious, but she caught something else underneath, not quite humor, but a dryness that suggested he wasn't entirely without it. "How fortunate for me that tonight was a woman night." "Fortunate for both of us. Cattle are heavier to carry." Despite herself, Claire felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "Do you live in town, Mr. Colt?" "No, ma'am. Got a place up north, near the tree line. I come to town for supplies. Deliver mail when the weather's bad enough the regular carrier can't get through." "You're a postman." Sometimes, also hunt, trap, guide when needed. Whatever keeps food on the table and a roof overhead. They turned a corner, and Claire recognized the church spire ahead. Relief washed through her. I know where we are now. Good. He stopped at the intersection where Main Street began. Inn's 2 blocks down on your left. Thank you, Mr. Colt. I appreciate your assistance. He touched the brim of his hat, a brief gesture that might have been a nod. Might want to stick to the main streets until you learn your way around. Red Hollow's got a respectable side and a not-so-respectable side. They tend to blur together after dark. Claire bristled slightly at the advice, hearing echoes of Thomas telling her where she could and couldn't go. I'm quite capable of taking care of myself. Never said you weren't. His voice remained level, unbothered by her defensive tone. But capability and familiarity are different things. Even strong swimmers can drown in unknown waters. Before she could respond, he said something she didn't expect. Not everyone needs rescuing, but there's no shame in accepting company for part of the journey. The words hung in the air between them. Claire found herself studying his face in the lamplight, weathered but not old, with deep-set eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. There was no judgment in his expression, no condescension or pity, just a statement of fact, delivered with the same calm certainty he might use to predict weather. Thank you, she managed. He touched his hat again and turned to go, leading his horse back the way they'd come. Claire watched until the darkness swallowed them both, then hurried the remaining blocks to the inn. Mrs. Brennan was in the lobby, trimming lamp wicks. She looked up when Claire entered, her sharp eyes taking in the dust on her skirts and the slight dishevelment of her hair. Out late for a lady alone. I was visiting potential clients, lost track of time. Mrs. Brennan's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Supper's over, but there's bread and cheese in the kitchen if you're hungry. Thank you, but I'm fine. Claire climbed the stairs to her room, her mind replaying the encounter with James Colt. She'd been in Red Hollow 3 days and had already met dozens of people, shopkeepers eager for her business, women suspicious of her presence, men who looked at her like she was either prey or poison. But Colt had been different. He'd helped without demanding gratitude, spoken without expecting conversation, left without requiring anything in return. In her room, she lit the oil lamp and examined the spool of blue thread he'd picked up. Such a simple thing, but he'd handled it carefully, as if understanding it was part of her livelihood. Thomas would have made a joke about women's work, would have used her need for help as evidence of female weakness. She undressed slowly, hanging her dusty dress on the hook and pouring water from the pitcher to wash. The water was cold but clean, and she savored the simple ritual of making herself presentable again. As she brushed her hair 100 strokes, like her mother taught her, she thought about Colt's parting words. Not everyone needs rescuing. How had he known that was exactly what she needed to hear? That she'd spent months feeling like a failure for not being able to save her marriage, for needing to flee instead of fixing things. Through her window, she could see the main street below, now mostly empty except for the men heading to or from the saloon. Somewhere out there, James Colt was making his way home to a cabin near the tree line. She imagined it would be spare but solid, like the man himself. No flourishes or unnecessary decorations, just 4 walls and a roof that did what they were meant to do. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Devlin, it's Lucy. Claire wrapped her shawl around her nightgown and opened the door. Lucy stood in the hallway with a covered plate. Ma said you didn't eat. She sent this up. The plate held thick slices of bread, cheese, and dried apple rings. Claire's stomach growled, reminding her she'd been too nervous to eat much at breakfast. Thank your mother for me. Yes, ma'am. Lucy hesitated. Ma'am, was that James Colt who walked you back? Samuel at the livery said he saw you with him. The speed of small-town gossip never ceased to amaze. He was kind enough to give me directions when I got turned around. Mr. "Colt's a good man," Lucy said earnestly. "Quiet-like, but good. He brought medicine through a blizzard once when my little brother had the fever. Wouldn't take no payment neither." After Lucy left, Claire sat in her chair by the window and ate slowly, thinking about a man who delivered medicine through blizzards and rescued lost seamstresses without making them feel rescued. Outside, the town settled into night dogs barking, horses stamping, the distant tinkle of piano keys from the saloon. She'd come to Red Hollow to disappear, to become invisible until the wounds healed. But already the town was weaving her into its fabric, making her part of its story. And somewhere out there in the darkness, a man named James Colt was riding home alone, having done his good deed without fanfare or expectation. Claire finished her simple meal and prepared for bed, but sleep was slow in coming. She lay in the narrow bed, listening to the night sounds, and wondered if all cowboys were so quietly philosophical, or if she'd just met an unusual one. Either way, she suspected James Colt would appear in her thoughts more than was entirely proper for a woman starting fresh. But then she'd left proper behind in Kansas, along with her wedding ring and her illusions about happily ever after. 2 weeks had passed since Claire's arrival in Red Hollow, and the rhythm of the town was beginning to reveal itself to her. Mornings brought the ranchers to town for supplies, afternoons saw the women at market, and evenings belonged to the saloon crowd. She'd learned to navigate both the streets and the social currents, though neither welcomed her fully. The general store was busy when she entered that Tuesday morning. Martha Blackwood stood behind the counter, measuring out flour for Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife. Several other women clustered near the fabric display, their voices carrying clearly across the store. "I heard she left her husband," Mrs. Patterson was saying. "No proper woman abandons her marriage vows." "Perhaps he was cruel," suggested a younger woman Claire recognized as the schoolteacher. "Even so," Mrs. Patterson's voice dripped disapproval. "We took oaths before God, for better or worse, not until it becomes inconvenient." Claire forced herself to examine the thread selection, though her hands trembled slightly. She'd known this would follow her. These whispers and judgments. Women who left their husbands were suspect, damaged goods, threats to the social order. "Can I help you, Miss Devlin?" Martha's voice cut through the chatter. She'd finished with Mrs. Patterson and now stood before Claire, her expression carefully neutral. "I need brown thread and buttons. Shell, if you have them." Martha gathered the supplies while the other women fell silent, watching. Claire felt their eyes like pins, holding her in place for examination. "That's quite fine needlework," Mrs. Patterson finally said, gesturing to Claire's sleeve where she'd mended a small tear with nearly invisible stitches. "Where did you train?" "My mother taught me. Then I apprenticed with a seamstress in Philadelphia." "Philadelphia," Mrs. Patterson made it sound like a disease. "And your husband didn't mind you working?" Claire met her gaze steadily. "I'm no longer married, Mrs. Patterson." "So we've heard." The banker's wife sniffed. "Well, I suppose even fallen women need to eat." The word stung like a slap. Claire opened her mouth to respond, but Martha intervened. "That'll be 60 cents. Miss Devlin, would you like to start an account?" "No, thank you. I prefer to pay as I go." She counted out the coins with steady fingers, though rage simmered beneath her skin. Fallen woman. As if she were the one who'd broken their vows, who'd brought another woman into their bed, who'd used fists when words weren't enough to wound. The bell above the door chimed as she left, and she heard the voices rise again behind her, pecking at her reputation like crows at carrion. The morning sun seemed too bright, the street too exposed. She wanted nothing more than to retreat to her room, but she had promised to deliver Mrs. Hammond's mended tablecloth today. The church sat on a small rise at the end of 2nd Street, its white paint peeling but its bell tower straight and true. Claire paused at the door, gathering her composure. Inside, She could hear the minister's wife playing hymns on the slightly out-of-tune piano. "Miss Devlin?" She turned to find Reverend Morrison approaching. His thin face creased with concern. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with kind eyes behind wire spectacles. "Reverend, I was just passing by." "Were you, or were you deciding whether to come in?" His directness surprised her. "I haven't been to services since arriving." "Noticed that. Also noticed Mrs. Patterson giving you the treatment in Martha's store just now." He glanced toward the general store, then back at her. "Small towns have windows everywhere, I'm afraid." "I'm getting used to it." "Are you?" He studied her with those kind eyes. "You know, we have a saying here in Red Hollow, everyone's running from something. The fortunate ones are running to something too. And which am I?" "That's for you to decide, isn't it?" He smiled gently. "Services are at 10 on Sundays. You'd be welcome. Despite what some of our congregants might suggest, the Lord's house has room for all kinds of stories." Claire murmured her thanks and continued to Mrs. Hammond's house, the Reverend's words echoing in her mind, running from or running to. She wasn't sure anymore. Mrs. Hammond lived in a small blue cottage surrounded by the remnants of a summer garden. The old woman answered the door slowly, squinting through clouded eyes. "That you? Miss Devlin? Come in, come in. These old bones don't do well in doorways." The cottage smelled of lavender and baked bread. Every surface held evidence of a life lived fully photographs, embroidered samplers, delicate teacups. Mrs. Hammond led her to the parlor, moving with the careful certainty of someone who knew every obstacle by heart. "Your tablecloth," Claire said, unfolding it carefully. "I reinforced all the weak spots and matched the original pattern as closely as possible." "Mrs. Hammond ran her fingers over the repairs, her face lighting up. "Oh, child, these old fingers haven't done work this fine in years. What do I owe you?" 50 cents. Highway robbery for work this good. Here's $1, and I won't hear arguments." She pressed the coins into Claire's hand. "Now sit, I've got tea brewing and nobody to share it with." Claire knew she should go. She had other work waiting, but something about the old woman's loneliness spoke to her own. She sat in a chair that had probably held visitors for 40 years while Mrs. Hammond poured tea with practiced ease despite her poor vision. "I hear you've met our Mr. Colt, Mrs. Hammond said without preamble. Claire nearly choked on her tea. "The town gossip is remarkably efficient. Gossip's the only entertainment we have some winters." The old woman's smile was mischievous. "James is a good man. Came here about 6 years ago. Built that cabin of his with his own hands. Keeps to himself mostly, but never fails to help when needed." "Why does he keep to himself?" "Same reason you do. I expect sometimes the world gets too loud and you need a place where the only voice you hear is your own." Mrs. Hammond sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Lost his wife and baby to scarlet fever back wherever he came from. Don't know the details, he's not one for talking about the past." Claire felt a pang of unexpected sympathy. She'd been so focused on her own wounds she hadn't considered that others might carry similar scars. "The town ladies have been trying to marry him off for years," Mrs. Hammond continued. "The widow Jenkins practically threw her daughter at him last Christmas. He was polite as always, but firm. Some folks are meant to be alone." "That's rather sad." "Is it? Seems to me being alone by choice is better than being together in misery." The old woman's clouded eyes seemed to see straight through her. "But then, you'd know about that." Claire set down her teacup carefully. "The town gossip truly is efficient." "Don't need gossip to recognize a woman who's been disappointed by love. You've got that careful way of moving, like you're expecting a blow. Seen it before in women who've had the fairy tale turn nightmare." Tears pricked at Claire's eyes. She blinked them back, but Mrs. Hammond reached over and patted her hand. "No shame in leaving a bad situation. Child, the shame belongs to them who'd have you stay and suffer for appearance's sake." They finished their tea in companionable silence, and when Claire left, she carried a list of other women who needed sewing done, friends of Mrs. Hammond, who trusted her judgment more than town gossip. The afternoon was spent visiting these potential clients, and by evening Claire had secured enough work to keep her busy for weeks. She was returning to the inn, arms full of fabric bundles, when she saw him. James Colt stood outside the blacksmith's shop, discussing something with the smithy while holding his horse's reins. The late sun caught the silver threading through his dark hair, and when he turned slightly, she saw the strong line of his jaw, the weathered planes of his face. He noticed her at the same moment, touching his hat brim in that brief acknowledgement she was beginning to recognize. Claire nodded back, intending to pass by, but his horse had other ideas. The bay stretched its neck toward her bundles, nostrils flaring with curiosity. "Scout, mind your manners," James said mildly, drawing the horse back. "It's all right. He's beautiful." The words came out before she could stop them. "He's a nuisance, but we get along." James studied her armload of fabric. "Looks like business is picking up." "Yes, Mrs. Hammond has been very kind with referrals. She's good people, sees clear despite those eyes of hers." There was a pause that might have been awkward with another man, but James Colt wore silence like comfortable clothes. Claire found herself in no hurry to fill it. "You finding your way around town better?" he finally asked. "Yes, I've been staying on the main streets, as you suggested." A slight smile touched his lips, just a subtle shift that suggested amusement. "Probably wise." The blacksmith emerged from his shop, ending their brief conversation. James touched his hat again and led Scout away, but not before saying quietly, "Evening, Miss Devlin." "Evening, Mr. Colt." She watched him walk down the street, noting how people nodded respectfully as he passed. A man who kept to himself, but had earned the town's regard through quiet acts of service. A man who had lost everything and chosen isolation over the risk of losing again. In her room that night, Claire spread out the fabric pieces and began planning her work, but her mind kept drifting to Mrs. Hammond's words about being alone by choice versus together in misery. She thought of James Colt in his mountain cabin, of herself in this small room, both of them refugees from lives that had promised more than they delivered. Through her window, she could see the mountains turning purple in the dying light. Somewhere up there, a man who understood loss was probably watching the same sunset. The thought was oddly comforting. She picked up her needle and began to sew, each stitch a small act of creation, of hope. The women of Red Hollow might whisper about her, might call her fallen and improper, but they would wear the clothes she made, trust her with their precious fabrics. And perhaps that was enough for now to be useful, to be skilled, to slowly stitch herself into the fabric of this rough town. The memory of James Colt's slight smile stayed with her as she worked, warming her like a small flame against the growing mountain cold. "Not everyone needs rescuing," he'd said. "But sometimes," she thought, it was nice to know someone was watching the path, ready to offer directions if you lost your way. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, and he was bleeding. Claire had just stepped out of the mercantile when she heard the crash metal against stone, followed by a child's sharp cry. Outside the blacksmith's shop, a small figure lay crumpled on the ground, a twisted piece of iron fencing nearby. She dropped her parcels and ran, her skirts catching the dust. The boy was trying not to cry, his lower lip trembling as he clutched his leg. Blood seeped through his torn trousers. "Don't move, sweetheart," Claire said, kneeling beside him. Other townsfolk were gathering, but no one seemed to know quite what to do. "Fetch Dr. Hawthorne," someone called out. "He's out at the miller's farm," another voice answered. "Won't be back till evening." Claire gently moved the boy's hands away from the wound. The gash was deep but clean, running along his shin. Without hesitation, she tore a strip from her petticoat, good cotton, clean, and pressed it against the cut. "What's your name?" she asked. keeping her voice calm. "Timothy," he whispered. "Timothy Brennan." Lucy's brother. Claire's heart squeezed. "Well, Timothy, you're being very brave. Can you hold this cloth here while I tear another piece?" The blacksmith's wife, Mrs. Kowalski, pushed through the crowd, a sturdy woman with arms like ham hocks. She took in the scene with practiced eyes. "Bring him into the shop," she ordered. "I've got clean water and carbolic." Together, they carried Timothy inside. Claire cleaned the wound with steady hands while Mrs. Kowalski held the boy still. He whimpered but didn't pull away, his eyes fixed on Claire's face as if her calm expression was the only thing keeping him from panic. "You've done this before," Mrs. Kowalski observed. "My mother was a midwife. I often helped her." Claire didn't mention the other times tending her own wounds in secret, learning to hide bruises with careful clothing choices. She bandaged Timothy's leg with strips from her petticoat, her stitching background serving her well in creating even, secure wrapping. By the time she finished, quite a crowd had gathered in the doorway. "The boy needs rest and the bandage changed daily," Claire instructed Mrs. Kowalski. "Keep it clean and watch for fever." "You heard her." Mrs. Kowalski boomed at the crowd. "Nothing more to see. Get on with your business." As people dispersed, Mrs. Brennan arrived, Lucy at her heels. The innkeeper's usual stern expression crumbled when she saw her son. "Timothy, oh, Lord, what happened?" "He's all right," Claire assured her. "The cut's clean, no broken bones." Mrs. Brennan's eyes moved from her son to Claire's blood-stained skirts and torn petticoat. Something shifted in her expression, a softening that hadn't been there before. "You ruined your things. Cloth can be replaced. Children cannot." The innkeeper's eyes misted. She squeezed Claire's hand briefly, a wordless thank you that meant more than speeches. That evening, Claire was mending her torn petticoat when a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Lucy holding a bundle. "Ma sent these. Said you're not to argue." The girl thrust the bundle into Claire's hands. Inside were 2 new petticoats, finer than what Claire had torn. "Lucy, I can't." "Ma said you'd say that. She also said to tell you that your money's no good at the inn anymore. Room and board's included for as long as you stay." Before the Claire could protest further, Lucy darted away down the hall. The next morning brought a stream of visitors to Claire's door. Mrs. Kowalski needed an apron mended. The minister's wife wanted a new collar for her best dress. Even Mrs. Patterson appeared, stiff-backed and pursed-lipped, holding a silk shawl with torn fringe. "I hear you do fine work," she said, as if their encounter at the store had never happened. Claire took the shawl without comment, named her price, and promised it within the week. After Mrs. Patterson left, she allowed herself a small smile. Nothing changed minds quite like demonstrated competence. She worked steadily through the morning, her window open to catch the October breeze. Around noon, she heard familiar footsteps in the hall-heavy boots, the measured tread she'd learned to recognize. A knock followed. James Colt stood in her doorway, hat in hand, holding a leather satchel. "Miss Devlin, heard you helped the Brennan boy yesterday." "It was nothing anyone wouldn't have done." "That's not what I heard." He shifted slightly. "I wondered if you might have time for some work." She gestured him inside. Propriety be damned. She wasn't conducting business in the hallway. He entered carefully, seeming to fill the small room with his presence. From the satchel, he pulled out several items, 2 shirts with torn seams, leather chaps with broken stitching, and a heavy coat with multiple rips. "Winter's coming," he explained. "These need to last." Claire examined each item professionally. The clothes told their own story: hard use, careful maintenance until now, quality materials chosen for durability rather than appearance. "The coat will take some doing," she said. "The leather's thick." "I've got time. Won't need it for another month or so." She calculated quickly. $3 for everything. Half now, half when finished. He pulled out the coins without haggling, placing them on her small table. Appreciate it. As he turned to go, Claire found herself speaking. Mr. Colt, thank you for the other night, for walking me back. He paused at the door. How's the seamstress business? Growing, thanks to yesterday's events. Apparently saving children is good advertising. You didn't do it for advertising. No, she agreed. I didn't. He studied her for a moment, and she had the sensation of being truly seen not as the runaway wife or the Eastern woman or the seamstress, but simply as herself. My cabin's about 5 miles north, past the Murphy Ranch. Trails marked by a lightning-struck pine. If you ever need anything supplies, help, whatever you're welcome. The offer surprised her. From what she'd heard, James Colt didn't extend invitations lightly. That's kind of you. Not kindness, just neighbors looking out for each other. He settled his hat back on his head. I'll be back in town in 2 weeks for the supplies. After he left, Claire stood holding his worn clothes, processing what had just happened. An invitation, an acknowledgement, a tentative extension of what, friendship or simply mountain courtesy? She spread his shirts on her small table, examining the damage more closely. The tears weren't from carelessness, but from hard work caught on branches, worn thin at stress points. She found herself taking extra care with the repairs, using her finest stitches, reinforcing areas that might wear again. That afternoon, Timothy Brennan hobbled up to her room, assisted by his sister. Ma says I'm to thank you proper, he said solemnly. So thank you, Miss Devlin. You're very welcome. Timothy, how's the leg? Sore, but I can walk, doctor. Hawthorne said you did everything right, said I was lucky you were there. We make our own luck sometimes, Claire said, ruffling his hair. Now, let me check that bandage. The wound was healing cleanly, no sign of infection. She rewrapped it carefully while Lucy chattered about school and the upcoming harvest dance. Are you going to the dance, Miss Devlin? Lucy asked. I hadn't heard about it. Oh, it's the big event before winter. Everyone goes. There's music and dancing, and Mom makes her special cider. I don't know. I'm not much for dancing these days. Timothy piped up. Mr. Colt never goes either. Ma says he used to dance before his wife died, but not anymore. Lucy shushed her brother, but Claire filed the information away. Another soul marked by loss, choosing solitude over the risk of renewed pain. That evening, she sat by her window working on James's coat. The leather was indeed thick, requiring special needles and considerable strength. As she worked, she thought about his invitation, a cabin 5 miles north, past a lightning-struck pine. She'd likely never take him up on it, but knowing it was there, knowing someone had offered sanctuary without expecting anything in return, warmed something inside her that had been cold for months. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere out there, James Colt was probably watching the same sunset from his cabin. Alone, but not necessarily lonely. Claire understood the distinction now. Alone could be a choice, a healing space, a place to rebuild yourself without the weight of others' expectations. She lit her lamp and continued working, each stitch a small act of care for clothes that would keep a good man warm through the winter. Outside her window, Red Hollow settled into evening dogs barking, children being called inside, the saloon piano starting its nightly repertoire. For the first time since leaving Kansas, Claire felt something that might have been contentment, not happiness that seemed too bright, too ambitious, but a quiet satisfaction in useful work, in slowly earning her place, in connections forming despite her attempts to remain invisible. The torn petticoat lay folded on her chair, replaced by Mrs. Brennan's gifts. Tomorrow she'd cut it up for bandages, keep them ready for the next emergency, because there would always be another emergency in a frontier town, another chance to prove herself through actions rather than words. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was how you rebuilt a life one stitch at a time, one kindness at a time, one day at a time, until the fabric of your existence was whole again, stronger at the mended places than it had ever been before. The November wind had teeth that night, rattling Claire's window and finding every gap in the inn's old walls. She'd been working late, finishing Mrs. Patterson's silk shawl by lamplight. When the light suddenly died, not just her lamp, the entire inn plunged into darkness. Voices rose from downstairs, Mrs. Brennan's among them, calling for candles. Claire felt her way to the dresser where she kept matches and her emergency candle. The tiny flame seemed pathetic against the pressing dark, but it was enough to see by. She heard footsteps in the hall, doors opening, the other boarders emerging to investigate. "Doctor!" Hawthorne's voice carried up the stairs. "Wind must have taken down the power lines. Happens sometimes before a big storm." Claire shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. Her small coal fire had died hours ago, and she'd been too absorbed in her work to notice the dropping temperature. Now, without the illusion of electric light, the cold seemed to press in from all sides. A knock at her door made her jump. She opened it to find James Colt in the hallway, holding a lantern that cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Miss Devlin, you all right?" "Yes, just cold and dark." He studied her small room, taking in the dead fire, the single candle, the pile of sewing on her table. "Storm's getting worse. Temperatures dropping fast. Mrs. Brennan asked me to check on folks. Make sure everyone has what they need." "That's kind of you. And her. You got enough blankets, Cole, for the fire?" Claire hesitated. She had one thin blanket and had been rationing her coal to make it last. Pride warred with practicality. James seemed to read her silence. "Wait here." He returned minutes later with an armload of split wood and kindling. Without asking permission, he knelt by her small fireplace and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. "Can't have the town's seamstress freezing. Bad for business." "I could have managed," she said, though her teeth were beginning to chatter. "Sure you could." He didn't look up from his work. "Just like you could have found your way back from the wrong side of town that first night." The fire caught, sending blessed warmth into the room. James stood, dusting off his hands. In the firelight, she could see new lines around his eyes, evidence of squinting into too many winter suns. "Thank you," she said simply. He moved to leave, then paused. "There's soup downstairs. Mrs. Brennan's orders everyone's to eat together tonight. Safety in numbers during a storm. I should finish this work. Work'll be there tomorrow. Warmth and food might not be." Something in his tone, not commanding but concerned, made her set down her needle. "All right." The dining room was transformed. Mrs. Brennan had pushed all the tables together and lit every candle she could find. The other boarders huddled close, sharing blankets and conversation. It reminded Claire of childhood evenings when storms would drive her family together around the kitchen fire. "Sit here, dear." Mrs. Hammond patted the bench beside her. The old woman had apparently been visiting when the power failed. Nothing like a storm to remind us we're all human. Claire sat, accepting a bowl of thick potato soup from Lucy. James took a seat across from her, his presence solid and reassuring in the flickering light. "Remember the storm of 82 inches?" Mr. Hollis, the telegraph operator, asked. "Snow so deep it covered the first-floor windows." "That was nothing compared to 76 inches, Mrs. Kowalski countered. "We burned furniture to stay warm that winter." The stories flowed with the soup, tales of survival and community, of neighbors helping neighbors through the hard times. Claire listened, feeling herself drawn into the circle of shared experience. "What about you, Miss Devlin, Doctor?" Hawthorne asked. "Any memorable storms from back east?" Claire thought of a different kind of storm the night Thomas had come home drunk and violent, the night she'd hidden in the root cellar while he raged above. But that wasn't a story for sharing. "Once, when I was 12, an ice storm coated everything in crystal. The whole world looked like it was made of glass. Beautiful. but deadly tree branches crashing down all night from the weight. "Like people sometimes." "Mrs." Hammond murmured. "Beautiful but fragile." James looked up from his soup, his eyes meeting Claire's across the table. She had the feeling he'd heard what she hadn't said, understood the storms she couldn't speak of. The wind howled louder, and somewhere outside, something crashed. Timothy Brennan pressed closer to his mother, his recent injury making him more aware of his vulnerability. "I should check the horses," James said, rising. "In this weather, Mrs." Brennan protested. "They'll be spooked. Someone needs to make sure the stable doors are secure." He pulled on his coat, the one Claire had mended. She noticed with a small flush of pride the stitches were holding perfectly despite the strain. "I'll help." "Mr." Hollis offered, and several other men stood as well. They filed out into the storm, leaving the women and children to tend the fire and candles. Claire found herself watching the door, an unexpected anxiety tightening her chest. "He'll be fine, Mrs." Hammond said quietly. "That man survived worse than a November blow." "I wasn't," Claire began, then stopped. No point in denying concern that must be written on her face. "Nothing wrong with caring about folks," the old woman continued, "even when caring's got teeth." The men returned after what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. They were covered in snow, faces red with cold, but triumphant. "Horses are secure," James reported to Mrs. Brennan. "Fixed a loose door before it could blow off." His eyes found Claire's briefly, a silent reassurance that all was well. She felt the knot in her chest loosen. The evening continued with more stories, more soup, and even some singing when Mrs. Brennan produced an old guitar. Claire found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. These people, who had seemed so judgmental in daylight, showed different faces in the storm's democracy. "You should come to the harvest dance," Lucy said suddenly during a lull in conversation. "It's next Saturday. Everyone comes." "I don't really dance anymore," Claire said gently. "Neither does Mr. Colt," Timothy piped up. "Maybe you could not dance together." The boy's innocent suggestion brought chuckles from the adults and a slight reddening to Claire's cheeks. James, however, seemed unperturbed. "The boy's got a point," he said mildly. "Two people not dancing takes up less room than two people not dancing separately." Was that humor in his voice? Claire couldn't quite tell. "I'll consider it." As the evening wore on and the storm showed no signs of abating, sleeping arrangements were reorganized. The women and children would stay in the dining room near the big fireplace. The men would take shifts keeping the fires going and checking the building. Claire helped settle the children, her movements efficient and gentle. She caught James watching her once, something unreadable in his expression. "You're good with them," he said quietly when she passed near him. "I always wanted—" She stopped, swallowed. "I like children." He nodded as if he understood what she hadn't said. Perhaps he did. Loss recognized loss, even when the shapes were different. As the night deepened, Claire found herself sitting by the fire with Mrs. Hammond dozing beside her. James sat across the room, carving something from a piece of wood with slow, careful strokes. The storm had created an island of warmth and light in the darkness, a temporary family forged by necessity. "Can't sleep?" James asked quietly, not looking up from his work. "Too much to think about." "Storms'll do that. Strip away the everyday. Leave you with just the essentials." "And what are the essentials, Mr. Colt?" He paused in his carving, considering. "Warmth, food, people who'll check on you when the lights go out." "Is that why you came? Because Mrs. Brennan asked?" "Partly." He resumed carving. "Also because I remembered a woman who got lost in the dark once before. Figured she might appreciate a lantern." Claire felt something shift inside her chest, a wall crumbling just a little. I do." They sat in companionable silence while the storm raged outside. Eventually. Claire dozed, waking only when the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows. The wind had died, leaving a world transformed by snow. James was gone, but on the table beside her sat a small carved figure, a horse, running free, mane flying, no note, no explanation, just a gift left in the quiet hours while she slept. Claire picked up the carving, running her fingers over the smooth wood. Around her, the town began to stir, people emerging from their storm cocoons to face whatever damage the night had wrought. But for just a moment, she held the little horse and felt something she'd thought lost forever, the possibility that kindness could exist without obligation, that care could be offered without demanding payment. The storm had passed, but its gifts remained, warmth shared, walls lowered, and a tiny wooden horse that spoke of patient hands and a generous heart. Claire tucked it into her pocket and went to help with breakfast, carrying with her the quiet certainty that she was no longer quite so alone. The Silver Dollar Saloon was no place for a lady, especially not at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. Claire knew this, had avoided the establishment since arriving in Red Hollow, but Mrs. Kowalski's nephew had torn his only good shirt in a fight, and she'd promised to deliver the mended garment before he left town at dawn. She entered through the back door, hoping to find young Stefan quickly and leave unnoticed. The main room reeked of whiskey and tobacco smoke, crowded with cowboys spending their pay. Claire kept her head down, weaving between tables toward the bar where Stefan worked. A hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Well, what's a pretty little seamstress doing in a place like this? The man was drunk, that much was obvious. Red-faced and swaying, he pulled her closer despite her attempt to step back. Claire recognized him, Hank Morrison, a ranch hand with a reputation for trouble. "Please let go," she said firmly. "I'm here on business." "Business?" He laughed, ugly and insinuating. "That what they're calling it now?" Claire tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Other patrons were beginning to notice, some watching with interest, others carefully looking away. Her heart hammered. Memories of Thomas flooding back, the smell of whiskey on his breath, hands that grabbed and wouldn't let go. "The lady asked you to let go." James Colt stood behind Morrison, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. He'd appeared without sound, moving through the crowd like smoke. Morrison turned, still holding Claire's wrist. "This ain't your concern, Colt." "You're right, it's not my concern." James stepped closer, and though he was relaxed, something in his presence made the air feel charged. "It's hers. And she said no. That's all that needs saying. Maybe she's playing hard to get. Women do that." "No." James's voice remained level. "They don't. You're thinking of something else. Maybe fear, maybe politeness, maybe just trying to get through their day without trouble. But when a woman says no, she means no." Morrison's face darkened. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm calling you a man who needs to let go of the lady's wrist and walk away." The saloon had gone quiet, everyone watching. Claire could feel the tension building, violence hovering like a storm cloud. But James stood perfectly still, hands loose at his sides. No threat in his posture, just an absolute certainty that made Morrison's bravado look childish. "This about her being your woman," Morrison slurred. "This is about her being a person who said no. That's enough." Something in James's eyes must have penetrated Morrison's drunk haze. He released Claire's wrist, shoving her slightly as he did. She stumbled, but James steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Ain't worth the trouble anyway," Morrison muttered. Turning back to his drink, James guided Claire toward the back door, his hand barely touching her back but its presence reassuring. Once outside in the cold night air, he stepped away, giving her space. "You all right?" Claire rubbed her wrist, trying to stop the trembling that had nothing to do with the cold. "Yes, thank you. I shouldn't have come here alone. You should be able to go anywhere in this town without being manhandled. The fault's his, not yours." The simple statement, delivered without judgment, nearly undid her. She'd heard so many variations of blame if only she'd been more careful, more accommodating, less independent. But James offered none of that, just a clear assignment of responsibility where it belonged. "I was delivering Stefan's shirt," she explained unnecessarily. "Mrs. Kowalski mentioned he needed it. Should have warned you not to come at night." He paused. "Want me to walk you back?" Pride warred with a shaking in her knees. "Yes, please." They walked in silence for a few moments. Claire found herself stealing glances at him. This man who'd defended her without violence, who'd stood up to a drunk cowboy with nothing but words and presence. "How did you do that?" she asked finally. "Make him back down without fighting." "Fighting's easy. Any fool can throw a punch." James looked ahead, his profile sharp in the moonlight. "Real strength is knowing when not to fight. Morrison's a bully, but he's not stupid. He knew I wasn't bluffing." "But you never threatened him." "Didn't need to. Men like that understand one thing's certainty. I was certain he was going to let you go. He felt that certainty and decided it wasn't worth testing." They reached the inn, warm light spilling from the windows. Claire turned to face him, words crowding her throat. "Mr. Colt James, I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. Though maybe next time you need to go to the saloon. You might mention it at dinner. Plenty of folks would be happy to escort you." I didn't want to be a bother. He studied her in that direct way he had. "You know what's a bother? Good people getting hurt because they didn't want to ask for help? That's a bother." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. "It's hard, asking when you've been told you're too much trouble, too demanding." "Whoever told you that was wrong?" His voice carried the same certainty he'd used with Morrison. "Asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Means you know your own limits and respect them." She thought of Thomas, how he'd twisted every request into evidence of her inadequacy, how she'd learned to need nothing, ask for nothing, expect nothing. "I'm still learning that," she admitted. "We're all learning something." He touched his hat brim. "Good night, Miss Devlin." "Claire," she said impulsively. "Please, call me Claire." A small smile touched his lips. "Good night, Claire." She watched him walk away, then entered the inn on unsteady legs. Mrs. Brennan was at the desk, taking one look at her face before bustling over. "What happened? You look white as a sheet," Claire told her, minimizing the incident but unable to hide her shakiness. "Mrs." Brennan's face darkened. "That Morrison's been trouble since he arrived. I'll have words with his boss come morning." She guided Claire to a chair, pressing a cup of tea into her hands. James sorted him out. "Yes, without any violence. It was, remarkable." "Mrs." Brennan smiled knowingly. "That's James. Quiet water runs deep, they say. He's got a way of handling things without fuss." "He was very kind." "Kind, maybe. But also right. You should be able to walk this town safely." "Mrs." Brennan patted her shoulder. "Though next time you need to go somewhere questionable. You tell me. That's what friends are for." "Friends?" The word warmed Claire more than the tea. When had she started thinking of these people as friends? Later, in her room, Claire sat by the window holding the carved horse James had left during the storm. She thought about certainty, about the power of knowing your own mind and standing firm in it. Thomas had eroded her certainty drop by drop, making her doubt her own perceptions, her own worth. But tonight, James had shown her something different. A man could be strong without being cruel, protective without being possessive. He'd defended her right to say no without claiming ownership of her, had offered help without demanding gratitude. Through her window, she could see the mountains outlined against the stars. Somewhere out there. James was probably home in his cabin, alone with his own ghosts. She wondered if he ever felt the weight of them, if solitude was freedom or just another kind of prison. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Lucy holding an envelope.
"This came for you earlier, but with all the fuss, Ma forgot to give it to you."
Claire recognized the handwriting immediately. Thomas. Her hands trembled as she took the letter. "You all right, Miss Claire?"
"Yes, dear, just tired."
After Lucy left, Claire held the unopened letter, her earlier calm evaporating. What could he want? The divorce was final, the property divided. She had nothing left he could take.
"Finally?"
She opened it, scanning the familiar handwriting. "Claire, I heard you've gone west, playing at being independent. When you tire of your little adventure and realize what you've thrown away, know that I might consider taking you back. A woman your age has few options." She crumpled the letter without reading more, throwing it into the fire. The flames consumed it quickly, reducing his words to ash, but the poison lingered, seeping into the cracks of her newfound confidence. "A woman your age, few options, playing at being independent." She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting tears. One letter, and she was back there small, worthless, blamed for everything that went wrong. "No." The word came unbidden. In James's certain voice, "No, she was not what Thomas said. She was a woman who'd saved a child, who'd earned her place through skill and kindness. She was someone worth defending, worth walking home, worth carving a small horse for during a long storm night." Claire straightened her shoulders and picked up her sewing. Tomorrow was the harvest dance. She'd told Lucy she would consider going, and now she would. Not to dance, she wasn't ready for that, but to be present, to claim her place in this community that was slowly becoming home. And if a certain quiet cowboy happened to be not dancing too, well, perhaps they could not dance together, taking up less room than they would apart. The cabin sat nestled against a hillside, smoke rising from its chimney into the December sky. Claire had never taken James up on his invitation to visit, but today she had a legitimate reason his mended clothes were ready, and he hadn't been to town in over a week. She'd borrowed Mrs. Brennan's buggy, following the trail past the Murphy Ranch until she found the lightning-struck pine he'd mentioned. The path beyond was narrow but clear, winding through stands of evergreen that filtered the winter light into soft green shadows. The cabin was smaller than she'd expected, but solidly built. Logs fitted tight against the weather. A lean-to sheltered split wood, and she could see a small stable where Scout likely spent his nights. Everything spoke of careful maintenance, of a man who took care of what was his. James emerged from the cabin before she could knock, alerted by the buggy's approach. He wore work clothes and no coat despite the cold, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked by years of labor. "Claire." Her name sounded different in his mouth, careful and considered. "Something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. I have your clothes." She gestured to the wrapped bundle on the buggy seat. "You hadn't come to town, and with the weather getting worse, I thought—" "You came all this way to deliver mending." Heat touched her cheeks. "It seemed important. Winter clothes, for a man who lives alone." Something shifted in his expression, too quick to read. "Come in. Coffee's hot." The cabin's interior was exactly what she'd imagined, sparse but clean. Everything in its place. A narrow bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a table and 2 chairs, shelves holding books and supplies. But what drew her eye were the photographs on the mantel, a young woman with kind eyes, holding an infant. James followed her gaze. "My wife, Sarah, and our daughter, Emma." She was beautiful. They both were. "Yes." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, his movements steady. 6 years ago this month, scarlet fever took them 3 days apart. Claire accepted the coffee, wrapping her hands around its warmth. "I'm sorry." "So am I." He sat across from her, the small table between them feeling both intimate and safe. "But sorry doesn't bring them back, and living in the past doesn't honor what they were. Is that why you came here to start over?" "Came here to stop
Stop remembering every corner where Sarah smiled, every shop where we bought Emma's clothes. Needed a place where the ghosts were my own, not built into the very streets. Claire understood that need, the desire to escape the geography of loss. Does it work, the stopping? Some days, others, I wake up reaching for someone who's not there. He studied her over his coffee cup. But you'd know about that. My ghosts are different. I wake up grateful for the absence. The words hung between them, more honest than she'd intended. James didn't look shocked or ask for details. He simply nodded. Those might be harder ghosts to live with. At least mine loved me back. The simple acknowledgement that her marriage had lacked love nearly undid her. She'd spent so long pretending, maintaining the facade of a happy union, that someone recognizing the truth felt like removing a splinter that had festered for years. "Show me the rest," she asked, needing to move past the dangerous intimacy of shared pain. He gave her the brief tour the stable where Scout and a pack mule lived, the root cellar stocked for winter, the workshop where he repaired tack and maintained his traps. Everything spoke of self-sufficiency, of a man who'd learned to need little from the outside world. "It's peaceful here," Claire said as they stood outside, looking over the valley below. That's what I was after. Peace, quiet, space to figure out who I was without them. "And have you figured it out?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Getting there. Turns out I'm still the same man, just less like a table missing a leg, still functional, but requiring constant adjustment to stay balanced. Maybe you're not less, maybe you're just different, changed by the breaking but not diminished." James looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing past the careful seamstress exterior to something deeper. That's a kind way of seeing it. Or a true way. We're all broken somehow, Mr. Colt. James, but broken doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes the cracks are where the light gets in. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. "You sound like Sarah." She had a way of finding hope in unlikely places. "She sounds like she was a wise woman. She would have liked you, I think, appreciated your steadiness, your way with people." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I'm glad you came today." "Just to deliver clothes," Claire said quickly, suddenly aware they were standing too close, the winter air pushing them together. Of course. But his eyes said he knew better. "Would you stay for lunch? I've got stew cooking, and eating alone gets tedious." She should go. Propriety demanded it, and the careful boundaries she'd built around her heart. But the cabin was warm, the company unexpectedly easy, and the thought of the empty inn-room waiting for her seemed unbearable. "I'd like that." They ate simple fare venison stew, fresh bread from town, preserved peaches for dessert. James was a good cook, seasoning with a practiced hand. They talked of inconsequential things, the weather, town gossip, the best places to find certain herbs come spring. But underneath the casual conversation ran a deeper current, an awareness that sparked whenever their hands nearly touched passing dishes, that hummed in the comfortable silences between topics. "I should go," Claire finally said as the sun tilted toward afternoon. "Mrs. Brennan needs the buggy back." James walked her out, helped her up onto the seat with hands that lingered just a moment on her waist. "Thank you for coming, for the clothes and the company. Thank you for lunch, and for showing me your home. You're welcome anytime. I mean that." She believed him. That was the wonderful, terrifying thing. She believed he meant exactly what he said. No more or less. The ride back seemed shorter, her mind full of images from the day, the photographs on the mantel, the careful order of his life, the way his smile changed his whole face, the way he'd said her name, like it was something worth being careful with. At the inn, Mrs. Brennan took one look at her and raised an eyebrow. "Good delivery." Yes, he was grateful for the clothes. I'm sure he was. The older woman's knowing smile made Claire blush. Will you be making more deliveries?
If needed. He lives quite far out.
Mm-hmm. Well, a seamstress must see to her customers.
Mrs. Brennan bustled away, humming something that sounded suspiciously like a wedding march. In her room, Claire unwrapped the payment James had insisted on giving her despite her protests. Along with the coins was a small object wrapped in brown paper. She opened it carefully. Inside was a carved wooden thimble, decorated with tiny flowers so delicate they seemed impossible. It fit her finger perfectly. No note, no message. Just a gift that showed he'd noticed her worn metal thimble, had taken time to create something beautiful and functional, something that would touch her hand every day as she worked. Claire sat on her bed, holding the thimble up to catch the light. She thought of James alone in his cabin, carving by lamplight, creating beauty despite his losses. Or perhaps because of them, perhaps the act of making something whole helped balance the things that could never be repaired. Through her window, she could see the mountains where his cabin nestled against the hillside. She'd crossed a line today, entering his sanctuary, sharing his table. The careful distance she'd maintained was dissolving, leaving her vulnerable to possibilities she wasn't sure she was ready for. But ready or not, something had shifted. She could feel it in the weight of the wooden thimble, in the memory of his smile, in the way her name sounded shaped by his careful voice. Claire picked up her sewing, slipping the new thimble onto her finger. It fit perfectly, smooth and warm against her skin. Each stitch she made would carry the memory of today of strong coffee and simple food, of photographs faced with courage, of two broken people finding their balance might be steadier when they stood close enough to catch each other if they started to fall. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering the world in new white, a clean slate. James had called winter once, a chance to start fresh. Claire smiled and continued sewing, the wooden thimble clicking gently against her needle, a quiet rhythm of possibility in the gathering dusk. The annual Christmas social was Red Hollow's biggest event, held in the town hall with decorations that had seen better decades but still managed to create magic in the lamplight. Claire had hemmed her best dress a deep green wool that brought out her eyes and tried to quiet the nervous flutter in her stomach. She'd seen James only twice since her visit to his cabin, both times in town on business. He'd been polite but distant, and she'd begun to wonder if she'd imagined the connection between them. Perhaps lunch had been merely mountain courtesy, the thimble just payment for services rendered. The hall buzzed with conversation and laughter. Tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes, and someone had managed to string paper stars across the ceiling. Children darted between adults' legs while the older folks claimed chairs along the walls.
"Don't you look lovely?"
"Mrs." Hammond said, patting Claire's arm.
"That color suits you."
"Thank you." Claire scanned the crowd, telling herself she wasn't looking for anyone in particular.
"He's by the door."
"Mrs." Hammond said with a knowing smile, talking to the Reverend Morrison. Heat flooded Claire's cheeks.
"I wasn't—"
"Of course not. Dear, now go get some punch before the Hollis boys spike it." Claire made her way through the crowd, exchanging greetings and compliments. She'd sewn dresses for half the women here, and several stopped to show off her handiwork. It felt good to see her contributions walking around, making people feel beautiful. Miss Devlin, Lucy Brennan, appeared at her elbow, practically bouncing with excitement. "You have to see the nativity costumes I helped Ma make. Timothy's a shepherd." Claire let herself be pulled toward the makeshift stage where children were preparing for the annual nativity play. She helped adjust halos and straighten shepherds' crooks, grateful for the distraction from her awareness of James's presence. The play was charmingly chaotic. Angels forgot their lines, sheep wandered off script, and baby Jesus misses. Patterson's grandson wailed through most of it, but the audience clapped thunderously, and Claire found herself wiping away tears at the simple beauty of it all. After the performance, dancing began. The fiddler struck up a lively tune, and couples took to the floor. Claire retreated to the refreshment table, content to watch.
Not dancing.
She turned to find James beside her, looking uncomfortable in his good clothes, but handsome nonetheless. His hair was freshly cut, and he'd shaved carefully, revealing the strong line of his jaw.
I told you, I don't dance anymore.
Neither do I. He paused.
Seems foolish, though. Two people standing separately when the floor's so crowded.
She looked up at him, catching the slight humor in his eyes.
Are you asking me to not dance, Mr. Colt?
Seems I am, Miss Devlin. They found a quiet corner where they could stand together without attracting too much attention. The music washed over them, and Claire felt the tension of the past weeks begin to ease.
I've been meaning to thank you,
she said, for the thimble. It's beautiful. You're welcome. Noticed yours was wearing thin. You notice a lot of things. Occupational habit. Tracking requires attention to detail. He shifted slightly closer as dancers swirled past. How's the sewing business? Busy. Everyone wants new clothes for Christmas. She hesitated, then asked, How's the mountain? Quiet, cold. Got 6 feet of snow up there now.
That must make it hard to get to town.
Some would say that's a benefit. But not you. He was quiet for a moment, watching the dancers. Used to think so. Lately, towns seemed less bothersome. Before Claire could parse that statement, Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the music. I must say, it's appropriate you two found each other, both clinging to your tragic pasts instead of moving forward properly. She stood before them, resplendent in burgundy silk not sewn by Claire, her expression full of false sympathy. I'm Mrs. Patterson, James said evenly.
Oh, don't mind me. I just think it's
interesting how some people can't seem to follow society's rules, abandoning marriages, wallowing in widowhood. She tisked. Though I suppose outcasts must stick together. Claire felt her spine stiffen, but before she could respond, James spoke. You know what I find interesting. Mrs. Patterson. His voice remained calm but carried an edge. How some folks think their opinions are gospel, when really they're just noise. Mrs. Patterson's face reddened. Well, I never... Also interesting, James continued. How the folks quickest to judge are usually the ones with the most to hide, like husbands who spend more time at certain establishments than at home. But that's none of my business, just like our lives are none of yours. The banker's wife went pale, then red again. She opened her mouth, closed it, then swept away in a rustle of silk.
How did you know about her husband?
Claire asked quietly. I don't, but most folks got something they'd rather others didn't examine too close. Sometimes reminding them of that helps them mind their own business. You defended me, again. Defended us both. Woman had no right to speak to either of us that way. The word us warmed her more than the crowded room. People will talk more now, about us being together. Let them. Their words don't change anything that matters. And what matters? He looked down at her, and for a moment, the crowd faded away. Truth, kindness, the choice to keep going even when it's hard. Finding someone who understands that broken doesn't mean worthless. Claire's breath caught. Those were nearly her exact words from the cabin visit. I remember everything you said that day, he continued quietly. About cracks letting light in. Haven't stopped thinking about it. James, I know you're not ready for anything beyond friendship. Neither am I. But I wanted you to know you matter. Your presence here. In this town. He paused, then finished simply. You matter. Tears pricked her eyes. When had someone last said she mattered? Not for what she could do or provide, but simply for existing. You matter too, she managed. They stood together as the dance continued around them. Two people not dancing, but somehow in perfect rhythm. When the music finally stopped for refreshments, James touched her elbow gently. Would you take a walk? Gets awful warm in here. They stepped out into the cold night air, breath misting in the moonlight. Other couples had the same idea, but James led her away from the clusters of giggling young people to a bench near the church. I need to tell you something, he said once they were seated, about why I've been distant these past weeks. Claire waited, hands folded in her lap to keep from reaching for him. After you visited, I realized something. For 6 years, I've been faithful to a ghost, kept Sarah's memory like a wall between me and the world. Told myself it was loyalty, but maybe it was just fear. Fear of what? Of feeling again, of losing again. He looked at her directly, of discovering that my heart wasn't as dead as I thought. Claire's pulse quickened. And now I think Sarah would be angry with me. She grabbed life with both hands, never held back from joy because it might end. She'd say I was dishonoring her memory by using it as an excuse to stop living. She sounds wise. She was, and she'd have liked you, a woman who stitches her life back together one day at a time, who helps others even when she's hurting. He paused. I'm not saying I'm ready for everything, but I'd like to try being ready, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Claire took a breath, gathering courage. I've been faithful to ghosts too. Different ones, the ghost of who I was supposed to be, the ghost of the marriage that never was. But sitting here with you, those ghosts feel less powerful. Maybe that's what we can do for each other. Help chase the ghosts away. I'd like that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their breath mingle in the cold air. From the hall came the sounds of renewed music and laughter. The town was celebrating, and for the first time since arriving, Claire felt truly part of it. We should go back in, James said eventually. Before they send a search party. Yes, but neither moved. Claire, Would you have dinner with me? Not at the inn or my cabin, but proper dinner. Maybe in Cedar Falls they've got a restaurant there, and nobody knows us. A real invitation, a declaration of intent, a step towards something neither of them could quite name yet. I'd like that very much. He smiled, that transformative expression that made him look years younger. Saturday, I'll borrow a proper buggy, pick you up at noon. Saturday. They walked back to the hall together, not touching but close enough that their sleeves brushed. Several people noticed their return, eyebrows raising and knowing looks exchanged, but Claire found she didn't care. Let them talk. Let them whisper about the runaway wife and the hermit widower. She and James knew the truth that two broken people might be stronger together than apart, that ghosts could be faced better with company, that mattering to someone was its own kind of miracle. The rest of the evening passed in a warm blur. Claire even found herself pulled into a Virginia reel, laughing as she stumbled through half-remembered steps. James watched from the wall, that small smile playing at his lips, and she thought maybe, just maybe, they were both learning to dance again. The storm hit without warning on Tuesday afternoon. James had left for the mountain station 3 days earlier, planning to check his trap lines before the weather turned worse, but the weather had its own plans. Claire stood at her window watching snow fall in thick curtains, obscuring the mountains where James was somewhere out there. The temperature had plummeted, and wind howled through the streets like a living thing, rattling windows and sending loose signs flying. Getting bad out there. Mrs., Brennan said, joining her at the window. Hope folks have enough wood laid in. When do the men usually come back from the mountain stations? Mrs. Brennan gave her a knowing look. Depends on the weather. Smart ones hole up and wait it out. But if someone's caught between stations when a storm like this hits... She didn't finish, but Claire's imagination supplied the rest. A man alone in driving snow. Temperatures that could kill in hours. Paths obscured and landmarks erased. James knows these mountains. Mrs. Brennan added gently. Been through worse storms than this. But as the day wore on and the storm intensified,
Worry settled in Claire's chest like a cold stone. She tried to work, but found herself listening for footsteps, for the sound of someone seeking shelter. By evening, the storm had become a blizzard. The inn was full of stranded travelers and misses. Brennan bustled about making sure everyone had food and blankets. Claire helped where she could, but her mind remained fixed on the mountains. Dr. Hawthorne, stranded at the inn after making house calls, noticed her distraction. "He's probably holed up in one of the line shacks," he said quietly. "Man like Colt doesn't take foolish chances." The line shacks. Small cabins scattered through the mountains, stocked with basic supplies for exactly this situation. He knows where they all are. It should have been comforting, but as night deepened and the storm raged on, Claire's worry only grew. She'd seen what winter could do, had helped her mother tend to frostbite victims, had heard stories of men found frozen just yards from shelter. She retired to her room but couldn't sleep. The wooden thimble sat on her nightstand, and she found herself holding it, running her fingers over the delicate carved flowers. Such careful work, such patient hands. The thought of those hands stiff with cold, struggling with matches or rope, made her stomach clench. Near midnight, she heard commotion downstairs, voices raised, boots stamping. She threw on her wrapper and hurried down to find several men in the lobby, covered in snow. Found him about 2 miles out. One was saying to Dr. Hawthorne, "Horse through him when the bridge washed out. Think his ribs are cracked?" Claire's heart stopped, then resumed when she realized they weren't talking about James, but seeing the injured rancher, pale and shaking, only intensified her fears. Wednesday dawned with no break in the storm. Drifts piled against buildings, and visibility was measured in feet. No one could go out safely, and no one could come in. Claire helped serve breakfast to the stranded guests, mechanically ladling porridge and pouring coffee. Mrs. Hammond, who'd been caught at the inn when the storm hit, patted her hand. "Worrying won't bring him in faster, child." "I know. I thought I'd lost the ability to worry like this about someone." "That's what caring does. Makes us vulnerable again." The old woman smiled sadly. "But the alternative is worse feeling nothing at all." The day crawled by. Claire mended everything she could find that needed mending, helped with meals, played cards with restless children, but always, part of her attention was on the door, waiting. By Thursday morning, the storm had blown itself out, leaving a world transformed. Snowdrifts reached second-story windows, and the silence after so much wind seemed almost oppressive. Men began organizing search parties for anyone who might be stranded. Claire wanted to go but knew she'd only slow them down. Instead, she helped prepare medical supplies and hot food for when they returned. "I'll check the northern routes," Samuel from the livery said, strapping on snowshoes. "Colt usually comes that way." "I'll take the eastern passes," another man added. They left in groups, spreading out across the white landscape. Claire stationed herself in the kitchen where she could see the street, stirring soup that didn't need stirring, brewing coffee that might not be drunk. Hours passed. Groups returned, some with stranded travelers, some empty-handed. Each time the door opened, Claire's heart leaped, then sank. "Nothing on the northern routes," Samuel reported, warming himself by the fire. "Snow's deep. If he's out there." He didn't finish, but Claire heard the rest. If James was out there, injured or lost, every hour reduced his chances. It was near sunset when someone shouted from the street. Claire dropped the ladle she was holding and ran to the door. A lone figure on horseback was approaching slowly through the drifts. The horse scout, she recognized even at a distance, was laboring, and the rider slumped in the saddle. "Get the doctor!" someone yelled, and men ran to help. Claire reached them as they were helping James down from Scout. He was conscious but clearly exhausted, his face white with cold above his frost-covered beard. His coat was torn, and she could see blood on his shirt. "Just scratches," he mumbled as Dr. Hawthorne appeared. "Horse spooked,"
Took a tumble down a ravine. Let's get you inside before you freeze solid, the doctor said briskly. They half carried him to the inn, Claire hovering nearby, wanting to help but not sure how. In the warm lobby, James's shaking intensified as his body began to thaw. Get those wet clothes off him. Doctor, Hawthorne ordered. Mrs. Brennan, hot water bottles. Miss Devlin, blankets from the warming cupboard. Claire flew to comply, returning with an armload of heated blankets. The men had gotten James out of his frozen outer clothes, revealing bruises along his ribs and numerous cuts on his arms. Line shack, doctor, Hawthorne asked as he examined the injuries. 2 nights, roof partially caved from snow. James's teeth chattered. Had to dig out this morning. You're lucky to be alive. The doctor said bluntly, these ribs are cracked and you're borderline hypothermic. Few more hours. Claire spread blankets over James, trying to keep her hands from trembling. He caught one of her hands as she tucked the blanket around his shoulders. Claire, his voice was rough. Sorry, missed dinner. A laugh that was half sob escaped her. We'll reschedule. Good. Was looking forward. His eyes drifted closed. He needs rest and warmth. Doctor, Hawthorne said, someone should stay with him. Make sure his temperature comes up gradually. I'll do it, Claire said immediately. Mrs. Brennan raised an eyebrow, but nodded. We'll put him in the room next to yours. Easier to check on him. They moved James carefully, settling him in the bed with hot water bottles at his feet and sides. Claire pulled a chair close, watching the color slowly return to his face. He woke periodically through the night, disoriented and shaking. Each time, Claire was there with warm broth or heated blankets, her presence seeming to calm him. Thought about you, he murmured during one lucid moment. When the roof came down, thought might not get to tell you. Tell me what? But he was already drifting again, leaving the question hanging in the warm air between them. By morning, his fever had broken and the shaking stopped. He woke properly as Claire was changing the compress on a cut on his forehead. You stayed. Of course I stayed. You scared me half to death, James Colt. Sorry. He caught her hand, holding it gently. Didn't mean to worry you. Well, you did. Do you have any idea what it's like, sitting here safe while someone you care about is out in that storm? Someone you care about. A small smile touched his lips despite his obvious pain. Claire blushed but didn't pull her hand away. Don't look so pleased with yourself. You nearly died. But I didn't. Made it back. His thumb traced small circles on her palm. Had promises to keep. What promises? Dinner in Cedar Falls, teaching you the mountain trails come spring, showing you that not all men disappoint. The simple words, spoken in his straightforward way, undid her. Tears spilled over before she could stop them. Hey now. James struggled to sit up, wincing at his ribs. Don't cry. I'm too banged up to comfort you proper. I'm not crying, Claire said, wiping her eyes. I thought I'd lost you, and I realized how much that would hurt. I'm not ready for that kind of hurt again. Neither am I, but seems like caring about each other is happening whether we're ready or not. He squeezed her hand. Maybe being ready is overrated. Maybe we just take it one day at a time, like everything else. Claire looked at their joined hands, his scarred and weathered, hers stained with ink and pricked by needles. Working hands, survivor's hands, hands that had learned to build new things from broken pieces. One day at a time. She agreed. James smiled and leaned back against the pillows. Good. Now, about that dinner. You're in no condition to travel to Cedar Falls. Then we'll have it here, when I can sit up without groaning, make it official-like, so the town gossips have something proper to talk about. Is that what we are now, something proper? We're something, rest we'll figure out as we go. Claire stayed with him through the morning, reading aloud from one of Mrs. Brennan's novels while he dozed. The storm had passed, leaving the world clean and new. Through the window, she could see townspeople digging out, helping each other, rebuilding after the storm. Just like her and James, she thought, digging out from under the weight of old griefs, helping each other navigate the drifts, rebuilding something new from winter's wreckage. When he squeezed her hand in his sleep, murmuring her name, Claire knew with sudden certainty that spring would find them still together, still figuring it out one day at a time. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Winter had settled deep into the valley, transforming Red Hollow into a picture from a snow globe. 3 months had passed since the storm that nearly took James, and in that time, something had shifted between them, slow and steady as mountain seasons, but undeniable as sunrise. Claire stood in the doorway of what would soon be her workshop, running her hand along the freshly sanded wood frame. The small building sat behind James's cabin, close enough to share warmth but separate enough to give her the independence she'd learned to treasure. "Think it'll do?" James asked, coming up behind her with another load of lumber. "It's perfect." She turned to face him, still marveling at how natural this felt, planning a future together. "Are you sure about this? It's a big change, having someone else here." He set down the wood and pulled her gently against him, mindful of his still tender ribs. "Been sure since you spent that whole night keeping me from freezing. Maybe before that, if I'm honest." Claire rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, strong and steady, like everything about him. "The town will talk." "Let them. We're doing this proper workshop first. Wedding come spring. Nothing scandalous about a man building his future wife a place to work." Future wife. The word still sent a thrill through her. He'd proposed simply, without fanfare, over dinner at the inn 2 weeks ago. Not a grand romantic gesture, just a quiet question posed between the soup and the main course. "Would you consider making this permanent? Claire, you and me?" She'd said yes without hesitation, surprising herself with the certainty of it. "Letter came for you," James said now, pulling an envelope from his coat. "Postmark says Kansas." Claire recognized the handwriting immediately, her former sister-in-law, Thomas's sister, who'd been the only one to show her kindness during the marriage. She opened it slowly. James giving her space but staying close. The letter was brief. "Dear Claire, I thought you should know Thomas has been arrested for embezzlement at the bank. His debts from gambling finally caught up with him. That woman he kept has already left town. I'm sorry for everything you endured. You deserved so much better. I hope you found happiness wherever you are. With love, Margaret." Claire read it twice, then handed it to James. He scanned it quickly, his jaw tightening. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. She considered. "Relieved, I think, and sad not for him, but for the years I wasted thinking I was the problem." She looked up at James. He always said no decent man would want me, that I was too independent, too difficult. He was wrong. James's voice carried that quiet certainty she'd come to love. "Your independence is part of what I love about you. Means you're choosing to be here, not staying because you have to. I am choosing it, choosing you, choosing us." He kissed her then, gentle but sure, and Claire felt the last ghost of her marriage finally fade away. Thomas was facing justice, and she was free, truly free to build something new. Later that afternoon, she was back at the inn packing her sewing supplies when Lucy burst in. "Miss Claire Ma says you're moving to Mr. Colt's cabin." "Not moving in exactly," Claire corrected with a smile. "Just setting up a workshop there. I'll keep my room here until the wedding." "Still," Lucy bounced excitedly, "it's so romantic, like a fairy tale." "Nothing like a fairy tale," Claire said gently. "Fairy tales are about princes and magic. This is about two real people choosing to build a real life together." Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway. Well said, though I'll miss having you here full time. I'll still be in town most days. Can't abandon my customers. Speaking of which, Mrs. Brennan held out a bundle of fabric. Mrs. Patterson sent this over. Wants a new Easter dress. Said to tell you she was wrong about some things. Claire raised her eyebrows. An apology from Mrs. Patterson was as rare as summer snow. Town's changing its mind about you two. Mrs. Brennan continued. Nothing wins folks over like a love story where both parties had to earn their happiness. That evening, Claire made her final trip to the cabin for the day. The workshop was taking shape shelves for fabric, a large table for cutting, windows positioned to catch the best light. James had thought of everything. She found him in the main cabin, preparing dinner. The domestic sight of him cooking still caught her off guard, sometimes this man who could survive alone in the mountains for weeks, carefully seasoning a pot of stew. "Smells wonderful," she said, hanging her coat on the peg that had appeared specially for her things. "Nothing fancy, but I figure we should practice this sharing meals, sharing space." He glanced at her. "Still time to change your mind. About marrying a man who cooks and builds me workshops, not likely." They ate by the fire, conversation flowing easily between comfortable silences. Outside, snow began falling again, but inside was warm and safe. Scout nickered from the stable, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled wild sounds that no longer frightened her. "I've been thinking," James said as they cleared the dishes, "about the wedding. Would you want to have it here or in town?" "Here," Claire said without hesitation. "This place, it's where we're building our life. Seems right to make it official here, too. Spring, then, when the meadow's full of wildflowers." He pulled her close. "Never thought I'd do this again, plan a future. Neither did I. But maybe that's why it works. We both know how precious it is, how easily it can be lost." "Not losing this," he said firmly. "Not you." They stood together watching the snow fall, and Claire thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a broken marriage in Kansas to a new beginning in Red Hollow. From a woman running from her past to one running toward her future. "You know what I realized," she said softly. "That first night you walked me back to the inn, you weren't just giving me directions. You were showing me the way home. It just took me a while to understand that home wasn't a place." "What was it then?" She turned in his arms to face him. "You, us. This life we're building one day at a time." James smiled, that transformative expression that still made her heart skip. "Welcome home, then, Claire." "Welcome home, James." Outside, Red Hollow settled into another winter night, but inside the cabin, two people who'd thought their best chapters were behind them wrote new ones together. The seamstress who'd arrived seeking invisibility had found visibility in the best possible way seen, known, and cherished by a man who understood that strength came in many forms. And the mountain man who'd chosen isolation had discovered that some things were worth opening your heart for again. That love, like spring, could return even after the harshest winter. Claire looked around the cabin that would soon be her home at her sewing basket, already claiming space on the shelf, at the 2 cups drying by the sink, at the man beside her who'd taught her that broken didn't mean worthless. She'd come to Red Hollow to hide. Instead, she'd learned to live again. And that was the greatest gift of all, not the dramatic rescue or the grand passion, but the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with a man who'd undressed her fears before ever touching her body, who'd shown her that real love wasn't about possession but about choosing each other, again and again, one ordinary day at a time. Spring would bring their wedding, summer would bring new challenges, and all the seasons after would bring their own tests. But tonight, safe in the warmth of what they'd built together, Claire knew they would face it all. Together. Thank you so much for listening to this story of Claire and James finding love in the American frontier. I hope their journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about their story. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more authentic frontier romances. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help more listeners discover these stories of courage, healing, and love in the Wild West. Until next time, partners.